Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at how to build a full stack application in C#. So this application will be consisting of the back end, right? We're going to be looking at how to write APIs and how to set up our database using Sqlite in C#. In the front end side, we have JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So this is the current project. I have it opened right here. It's called the Inventory Management System, right? Basically, what you do is you can add items, you can update in existing items, you can delete a single item, or you can delete all the items, right? And this is all stored in the database. For instance, if I added apples, right? Maybe say that apples are 10, right? And the price maybe 20 bucks. Right, and then I add the item. As you can see, the new item is added right here. There is apples, and if I wanted to update the item, I can just go ahead and say update, and then change maybe the quantity to 5, right, and maybe change the price to 15, and then just press the update button. As you can see, it's updated now. The quantity is 5, and the price is $15. All right, so now I'm going to show you that this is 100% persistent, right? All this is being written in the database on the back end, and you can see here this is my back end, right? This is my backend server, and it's running as I update my front end. Okay, let's go back to the app. So I'm just going to close this app to show you that this is persistent. So I'm going to close it, and I'm going to open it again. So I'm just going to go to this index.html and just open it in Chrome. And as you can see, the apples that I added is still there, right? And the banana is still there, and everything is still there, right? Because this is stored in the database. Okay, so I can also just delete all the items if I want. All right, so let's get started. All right, so the first thing you want to do is create a folder. So I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to name it Inventory Project. All right, and then I'm going to go into this folder and then create 2 more folders. The first one will be Inventory API, right? And the second one will be Inventory Frontend. All right, so this Inventory API folder is going to contain my backend code, and this Inventory Frontend is going to contain my frontend code. But for now, we're going to work with our backend first. We're going to look at our backend first. So what you want to do is open this Inventory API folder in your Visual Studio Code. So let's do that. So I'm going to say open with application, Visual Studio Code. So I am in Visual Studio Code right now, and you can see this is my current parent folder, which is Inventory API, right? It's empty. So let's fix that. So what you first want to do is run a command, a .NET command that says .NET Web API, right? No. It's .NET New Web API, right? Okay, write it like this, okay? And then it should create a template, right? A web API template here. Okay, so as you can see, the template ASP.NET Core Web API was created successfully. So if you get this message, it means that you've done it right. If you don't get this message, then try checking if you entered the command correctly, or if you have .NET installed. Okay, so you have to have .NET installed. All right, so now we're gonna add a few dependencies, right? We're gonna add a few packages that we're going to need for this project. The first one will be .NET add package, and we're gonna call this Microsoft .entity. Let me just stretch this out so you can see. Entity framework core, right? Microsoft.entity framework core .design. All right, enter. Alright, so I have added the Microsoft.entityFrameworkCore.design. To double check that this package was in fact added, we're gonna close the terminal a bit and go here to our project solution. Right, go to this inventory API.cs project. Okay, click there, and then on the right, if I just reduce this a bit, you can see that I now have the Microsoft Entity Framework Core.design. Alright, so we're gonna add one more package. Okay, we're gonna add one more package. We're gonna say, come to the terminal, right, and then let's just clear this so that our terminal is clear. Alright, so we're gonna say .NET again, add package, right, and then we're gonna say Microsoft, right, Microsoft.entity framework core, right, let me stretch this out a bit again, .SQLite. Alright, so type it exactly like this, otherwise you will get an error, right? So let's add this package. Okay, so that's done. Again, we can just go and verify that this package was added by going into this folder, inventory API.cs project. We go here, and there you go. You can see that it's added here. There is the Microsoft Entity Framework Core.SQLite, right? So this will be responsible for storing, right, our inventory, right, for persisting, right, whatever information that we enter, right? So it's a database. Okay. So if you want to remove this package, right, if you maybe you want to start over the project, you want to remove a necessary package, you want to remove a package that you don't want, or you've added something else, you can just go here and clear this line. Okay, you can just clear this line or run another command to remove it. Okay, but for now we're gonna continue. All right. So now what you want to do is create a folder. So I'm just gonna say option, new folder, right? And then I'm gonna say models. All right. You can also come here and say, click this button right here, this folder button right here, which will add another folder for you. Okay. So for example, if I delete this, right, I can say this, click this folder icon here for adding a folder, and then it's going to add a new folder. Let me just come here. Make sure that the folder that you create, you enter it in this inventory API folder, not inside these folders. Okay, so I'm just going to say models, right? I've created the folder, and inside this folder I want to create a file now, right? So I'm going to go to this file icon right here with the plus, and I'm going to click on it, right? And it's going to say item.cs. So I've created an item.cs file, right? So remember, you can also just say right click and then new file. Okay, you don't have to use these buttons right here. Okay, now I'm gonna click on the item.cs file and go to the right. As you can see, it is opened on the right here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do first is create a namespace. So I'm just gonna say namespace, okay, namespace, and then I'm gonna say inventory API, right? This is the name of my parent folder, as you can see, inventory API, and then I'm gonna say dot, and then I'm gonna enter the name of the current folder that I am on, right? Or rather of the current folder that this file, this item.cs file is in, right? So I'm gonna say .models. Okay, so any code that I write now will be inside this namespace, inventory API.models, in this model folder right here. Okay, so I'm gonna say now public class item, right? I'm going to create an items class, right? And this item will have, right, a public int ID. All right, and the ID is going to have a getter and setter. Okay, and then I'm going to create a public required string name, and it's also going to have a getter and setter, right? And then I'm going to have public int quantity. I'm going to have a getter and setter for the quantity as well. Lastly, I'm going to have public decimal price, and then I'm going to have a getter and setter for this as well. All right, so what have we done so far, right? We've created a model for an idle product, right? So this model is called an item. So any item that you have will have an ID. So any item that you add in the inventory will have an ID for that item, and then it will have a name, which is the name of that item, and it is required because you need to have a name for that item. And then we'll have quantity, right? The number of the items that you added for that specific item, right? And then you're going to have the price, right? Okay, so make sure that when you're creating this class, this item class, right, you have this namespace right here, namespace.inventory API, right? So this folder right here is for the parent folder, and this one, models.models, is this folder right here, the current folder that this item class is in, right? So as you can see, this item.cs file is inside the models folder. So that's why here we have this inventory.models. Okay, and then we have parentheses right here. You can see curly braces. We have curly braces, and inside the curly braces of the namespace, we introduce our code. All right. So now we're gonna create a database context. All right. So now let's create our database context. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this items.cs file, right? And then we're going to extend our Explorer and then just create a new folder here. New folder, and we're going to call this folder data. And inside the data folder, we're going to create a new file, and then we're going to call this file inventory context.cs. Right. So once we've created this inventory context.cs file, we're going to go to the right, and we're going to create a namespace. Remember what we did with the models folder? We're going to do it here as well. We're going to say namespace, right? Namespace, and then we provide the inventory API folder name, right? Because this is our parent folder, right? Inventory API. And then we're going to mention the current folder that we are on, which is data. Okay. So now that we've created this namespace, right, we're going to go inside it and create a class. We're going to call it public class inventory context. All right. And this inventory context is going to inherit from database context. Okay. Okay, and then we introduce curly braces. So note that if you did not install the necessary packages like we did when we began this video, right, you're going to have an error here, right? So you're going to have an error if you did not install the packages that we installed earlier. Okay, so this should be here, right? It will mean that you are missing this package, right? So make sure that you've installed the packages correctly, and if you encounter an error here, you can always just rewind the video and check what we did in order to install the Microsoft.Entity Framework core. All right, so inside this class, inventory context class, once we've inherited the database context, we need to create a constructor. We're going to say public inventory context, right, the name of our class, right, and then introduce parentheses, and then pass in an argument. We're gonna say database context options, this one. All right, and then of type inventory context, the name of our class, and then we're gonna say options. All right, but since we are inheriting from database context, we need to pass in the constructor to the base class as well, right? So we need to pass in the constructor parameter to the base class. So we're gonna say base, right, and pass in options. Okay. All right, so you should have something like this. All right, and then lastly, we're gonna create another instance variable, right? This time it's gonna be a database set, right, of type item, and then we're gonna say items, and then it's gonna be getter and setter. All right, so as you can see here, the models is now being imported here, right? Okay, so the important thing is here, right, we're saying getter and setter, right, but these won't work. Why? Because we haven't said anything here about the access level of this instance variable, right? So we might try to get items, and then we get an error saying that, you know what, this is inaccessible because, right, we didn't specify the accessor here, right? The thing is, if you don't specify an accessor in C#, right, the default accessor will be private. It means that no one can access this, even if you include this getter and setter right here. So what you want to do is make this public. Okay. So this should be your inventory context. All right. Remember again, if you're experiencing errors, right, either this item is not recognized, it just means that you haven't created this class set. Again, rewind the video and see how we created this class. Also, if you're getting an error with the database context as well, it means that you're missing packages like Entity Framework Core. Rewind the video and then just look at how we installed it. All right, so now we're gonna go and create our controllers. All right, so you wanna close this inventory context, right? Let's just go here and let's close this data folder right here. And then we're gonna create a new folder, and we're gonna call this folder controllers, right? So inside the controllers folder, we're gonna create a file, right? And this file we're gonna call items controller.cs. All right, so now that we've created this file, we're gonna go on the right inside this file, and as you have guessed it, we're gonna create a namespace again. We're gonna say namespace, right? And we're gonna say inventory API, remember the parent folder right here for our project, right? Dot. Now, because we are in the controllers folder, we need to say controllers, right? And then add curly braces. All right. So inside here, we then create a class, right? We're gonna say public class items controller. Okay, so this items controller is gonna inherit from controller base. So the controller base class. Okay, let me introduce curly braces. Now, before we continue here, we're gonna use a lot of annotations on our controller. So the first annotation we're gonna get here is that this is an API controller, right? So you're gonna say this is an API controller. All right, and we're gonna add another annotation here, and we're gonna introduce a route. We're gonna say this is route from API / square brackets controller. All right, so you need to have these annotations here. Okay, now we're gonna create an instance variable for our database context. So we're going to say private read only inventory context, right? And then we're going to create context as a variable. Okay. And then we're going to create a constructor to initialize this context variable. Okay. So we're going to say public items controller, right? And then we're going to pass in the inventory context, right? And then we're going to say context, right? So you can see the difference here. This one has a hyphen right here, and this one doesn't have any. Okay, so we then gonna say context is equals to context. Okay, but you don't have to do this. Okay, you don't have to introduce this hyphen right here. What you can do is you can just remove it, okay, and remove this one as well. In order to separate which one you are referring to, you can just say, if you're referring to this one here, you're gonna say this dot context is equals to context. Okay, but we can just go back to this here. Okay, it's supposed to be C there. All right. So this is our items controller class. All right. So now we're gonna create a few methods. Okay, we're gonna create a few methods to control our inventory. Right. So let's control our items. So the first one we're gonna build is we're gonna say public async, right? And you're gonna say task. You wanna say task, and you wanna say action results. Okay, you wanna say action results. And then you want to say enumerable. All right, enumerable because you're going to return a list of items. So we pass in the item. All right, then we make sure that the closing tags are equal in number to the opening tag. So this should be 1, 3. Okay, then we just write the name of our method, which will be get items. Okay, so inside the get items method, we're gonna say return await, right? Because this method is async, you'll have to say await first, okay, and then you're gonna refer to the instance variable that you created here, right? The database context, gonna say database context, right? Dot items. Remember the items we created in the inventory context? This is what we're referring to here, right? Dot items dot to list async. To list async. Right. Now remember we have to annotate this, right? This is gonna be an HTTP. This is gonna be an HTTP get. All right, so we've created our first function right here to get all items from our database. Okay, now we need to create another function to get a single item, because this returns a list of items. It gets all the items in the inventory. We need one to get a specific item, and to get a specific item, remember, we can get that by the item ID, right? All right, so let's do that. So we're gonna say public async task, and then we're gonna say action results. Okay, this time we don't have to say enumerable because we're just getting a single item, so we can just say item, right? And then just say, remember, the tags, the opening tags have to be the same as your closing tags here. Okay, so yeah, and then we say get item, and then we pass in an ID. Okay, so we then say var item await. Remember, this is an async function, so we have to say await and then context dot items dot find async, and then pass in the ID. All right. So what's happening here? So what we're doing is going to our database context, right, and calling the items dataset, right, and in this dataset we then try to find an item by an ID, right, because every item has its own unique ID. Okay, so once we get this item, right, there is a possibility that we do not find this item. Okay, so that's why we have to first store the item in a variable, right, because we might actually be returning null here. Okay, so if that's the case, then you want to tell the user to say, okay, if item is actually null, right, if item is null, right, it means that there's no such item in the database, then you want to return not found. Okay, you want to return not found result, right? Now the nicest thing about this is that because we said this is an action result return type, so we are able to actually return not found, right? This is a status, an HTTP status of not found. You would typically return like 404, right? So in this case, because it said action result, we're able to return not found like this. Okay, so for instance, if I just did this here, let me just get rid of this. If I just got rid of this, okay. Okay, you see now that I get an error here. Okay, I get an error here because this is expecting that this is an action result type right here. So what we need to do is return the action result. Okay, now what if we get the item then? Right, what if we get the item then? So we actually just return the item, right? We just say return item. Okay, so here I'm getting an error because remember when I removed this action result to try to explain to you something, I ended up messing up the closing tags here. Okay, so here we're getting all items. Here we're getting a single item by ID. So definitely show we need an annotation here. Okay, we need an annotation here. So it's HTTP get again. HTTP get again, but this time you have to check for an ID in the URL. All right, awesome. Let me just start with HTTP, an annotation this time. Right, HTTP put, obviously we're updating an existing item, so what we want to do is get an ID of the item that we're trying to update. Okay, and then you're going to say public async task, right? And then you're going to say action result. Okay, and then you're going to say item. So that's item for the items class. And then we're going to say update item. All right, so in this case we're actually not returning an item. We're not returning an item, so we're just gonna leave it like this here and say update an item, right? And then we want the ID of that item and we want the item itself. Okay, so what we want to do is check if the ID and the item match, right? So we're going to say if the ID is equals to item.id, right? Then you do something there, right? Then we update the item here. Right, but if it doesn't match, right, then we want to say else, right, just return bad request. Okay, so Now let's see how we actually update the item. So we're gonna say context dot entry, passing in our item, right? And then you're gonna say dot state, and you're gonna say entry state dot modified. All right, so let me just do that. Okay, yeah, dot modified, and then you're gonna say await, right? Obviously we're gonna have to say save changes, right? Dot save changes async, and then we're gonna return no content. All right, so this is a controller function for updating an existing item. So you wanna change a quantity value. Say you wanna change maybe the price, right? So this is what you'll have. Okay. So the last bit of method that we can look at is deleting an item, right? So we want to be able to delete an item. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say http delete, right? And then we want to pass in the ID of that specific item that we want to delete. Okay, and then we're going to say public async task iaction results, right? Iaction results, and then we're going to say delete, right? But then we'll pass in the ID of the item that we want to delete. Okay. Then obviously we want to check if the item that we want to delete exists first, right? So I'm going to say item is await context dot items dot find async, right? And then passing in the ID of the item, right? And then you check if the item is null, right? Just return item, sorry, just return not found. Okay, just return not found, right? But if the item exists, then we definitely want to delete it. So we're going to say context dot items dot remove, and then pass in the item that you want to remove, right? So this specific item right here that we got here, we're gonna just put it here when we're removing it, and then this function is gonna remove this item from the items set. Okay, and then we want to save the changes, obviously. So we're gonna say await context dot save changes async, right? And then we want to return no content. All right, so I know this seems like a lot, but we were careful to do it step by step. Okay. All right, so now we are finished with our controller, right? So we've added methods to get all items, to get a single item, to add an item, to update an existing item, and to delete an item, right? So it will be up to you if you want to add a method to delete all items. So that's my challenge to you. It's really that simple. Just make sure that here you don't put the ID, because now you don't care about whether you're deleting a single item, right? You're deleting all the items. So you probably use a HTTP delete, okay? But that's up to you. We'll see what you do with that. You'll handle that yourself. All right. So now we're gonna do an important step, our final, well, close to final step. Okay. So what we're gonna do is go to this app settings.json. Okay. Go to the app settings.json in the Explorer, right? In the folder Explorer, and then you open this app settings.json. As you can see, it's open on the right with me here. So what you do is press enter here, and then you say connection strings, right? and inside that you're gonna say default connection. Okay, default connection, and then you want to say data source, right? And then you want to say equals to inventory dot db. Right, so you want to have something like this. Okay, so I've just added a connection string here. I don't need that. I just added a connection string here, right, which is default connection, and then I initialized it to data source equals inventory dot database. You need this. Okay, you're gonna see how we will use this just now. In fact, let's just go ahead and use it. So I'm gonna close this app settings.json, right, and I'm gonna come here, right, on the program.cs, right? This program.cs was already here when you created the template project. You did not create it, I did not create it. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is delete a few things. Okay, number one is this swag, right? Use Swagger. You can use this UI if you want to test your backend, but in my case I don't need it, right? So I'll just clear all this. Okay, this was code that was already here. I'm just going to clear all this from here with open API to summaries, right? I'm just going to delete that, and I'm going to also delete this. I don't need it. Okay, also this build service.abstract generator, I don't need it as well. Okay, so what do you need then, right? So here's what I will need. So the first thing is I have to register my database context savers, right? So what I'm gonna say is builder, right, dot services dot add database context, right? And remember, we created our own database context, which is inventory context. There it is, right? We created our inventory context, right? And then we said options. We're gonna say options, right? And we're gonna pass in. Okay, so let me just leave a space here. Okay, so we're gonna say options dot uses Sqlite, right? Because we are going to be using Sqlite, right, to manage our database. And then we're gonna say builder dot configuration dot get connection string, right? So do you remember what we named our connection string, right? We said it was default connection, right? That is why we added that connection string, right, in our app settings.json, right? So this is the name. You make sure that the name is the same as the one in the app settings, right? If you go to the app settings for a moment, right, this is what we added, right? We said connection strings, right, and then we said default connection, and then we gave it this. All right, so we're just doing that right now. We're configuring our database context. Okay, so after this you have to add a semicolon here, and that's it, right? We've added our database context savers. Okay, so now we need to register our controllers, right? So we're going to say builder dot services again dot add controllers, right? All right, and we're going to say, okay, this another important thing. Since we're having a front end, right, since we'll be calling this code from the front end, we will be experiencing some errors with our cross origin, right? With cross origin, right? So in order to escape that error, just like be proactive about it, right? So we're going to be proactive about it and try to prevent that. So we're going to say builder dot services, right, dot add costs. All right, dot add costs, passing in our options again. Sorry, we're gonna pass in our options. Just gonna say, okay, we're gonna pass in our options. All So we're gonna say options dot add policy. So for our cost policy, we're gonna say for now, although this is generally not a good idea, we're gonna say for now allow all origins. Okay, allow all origins. But if you have a specific domain, right, that you want to allow, that you don't want to allow all domains calling your backend, you don't want any front end application, right, calling your front end, right, I mean, calling your back end, right? So in this case, if maybe for instance I had a front end site called Fallen World Studios, right? If I had Fallen World Studios as my domain, right? So I will allow only Fallen World Studios.com, right? So no other application is going to be calling my APIs except for fallenworldstudios.com, right? So that's what this is for. But for now, since we're learning, I'm gonna leave these two. Allow all origins, okay? So, and I'm gonna introduce parentheses now. Okay, and then I'm gonna say builder. Okay, and I'm gonna say builder dot allow any origin dot allow any method dot allow any header. Okay, and we need to nip this with a semicolon, and that's it, right? This is it with our cost savers, right? This is it with our cost policy. Okay, just make sure that if you are coding for production, right, make sure that you get this right. Okay, you cannot allow in all origins, right, depending on your specific needs. All right, so let's now come here, right? So we can leave this like this, but remember we removed the Swagger savers, right? So we don't need this here. We do not need this here, right? All we can do here is add app dot environment dot is development. Sorry, we're gonna add app dot use developer exceptions page. All right, because we already have this here. Okay, so now the last thing we have to do is, okay, we can leave this alone. We can say app dot use. You can say app dot use. Oh, sorry, I'm thinking of Node.js type. You can say app dot use course, and then we passed in allow all origins, right? And then we can say app dot use authorization, and then say app dot map controllers. All right, so that's it. But before that, we need this to be actually here. Okay, so we are done with our backend. Okay, so this is our backend. So this is the final part of our backend is done. Okay, so just make sure that you did everything correctly. Okay, particularly here, right, when you're registering your services, right, make sure that your database context is registered, right, make sure that you have added your controllers and you've handled the cost policy as well. Okay, so now we have to actually initialize our database. All right, so now I'm gonna go to my terminal. So I'm just gonna open my terminal right here, right? And I'm gonna write this command, .NET ef migrations add initial create. All right, then press enter. Okay, so I'm actually initializing my database now. First, I'm gonna add migrations. All right, so build succeeded. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is say .NET ef database update. All right, this is the final command, and then we are done with our backend. Okay, so as you can see here, we've created the table items. As you can see, there's the ID, there's the name, there's the quantity, there's the price, right? So if you see this information type and you see migration ID and all of this, then you have done well, right? You have created your first backend. Okay, so this is done. What we can do here is actually leave this running. Okay, so we can leave this running. Let's just say .NET run, right? So that we can continue to work on our front end. So we're gonna say .NET run here to leave the server running, right? The backend server running. Okay, so it's running on this port, right? It's running on localhost 5292. We're gonna go back to this later on, right? But for now, we can actually minimize this project and go back to inventory project and open our front end folder now, right? So we are here now. So we are done with our inventory API. It's now time to tackle the front end. So as you can see, it's empty. So what we're going to do is open this folder in Visual Studio Code as well. All right. So as you can see, our inventory front end is empty. So what you want to do is create a new file, right? Call it index.html. Create another one, call it index.js, and a final one, call it styles.css. All right, but we're gonna start at index.html so we can create our HTML front end. All right, so here in our HTML, we have to first create the boilerplate code. Okay, so I'm gonna say here HTML lang English. All right, so and then I'm gonna create the header tags as well. So let's just do this quickly. Body. All right, so let's look at our header first. So in our header, we have our meta tags. Okay, and then we'll have encoding. Okay, let's create another meta tag. We'll have the name viewport. Viewport. And then have content. We have width equals to device width. Right, and then that's initial scale equals to 1.0. All right, close this. Okay, and then we have the title. We're gonna call this inventory manager. All right, inventory manager. And then we need to include our styles here. So we're gonna say link your style sheets. Styles sheet. Sorry. It's styles sheet. Our hyperlink will be styles.css. All right. And then in our body, we wanna have a few things, right? So the first one we'll have is our h1, called say inventory management. Right. Inventory management, and then we're gonna have a div. So we're gonna give this div an ID of item form. So for this, we're going to use a div, but you can also use a form if you know. In fact, if you are comfortable with your front-end HTML, you can style this and build this however you want, right? So you're still going to have to pull from the backend, obviously, but you can be flexible here and do whatever you want, right? However you want to style your HTML and your CSS, right? According to your needs. Okay, so here, I'm going to say input. I'm going to say this is of type text, right? And then we're gonna say ID. This is gonna be the item name. Okay, this is gonna be the item name, and then the placeholder. We're gonna say name of the item. All right, and then we're gonna create another input of type number. Right, of type number. And then we're gonna give it an ID of quantity. Just say item quantity. All right, placeholder quantity. All right, and then we're gonna create an input again. Type number. Right, ID, this, as you would have guessed, is going to be our item price, right? And then we're going to say placeholder price. Right, and then lastly, we're going to need a button to add the item. So we're going to say on click, right? We want to add an item. Right, gonna add item. Okay, we're gonna create this function in our JS file. So don't worry about it for now. I'm gonna name this button add item. Okay, and that will be our form, right? That will be our form for adding a new item, and then we wanna display the items, right? So we're gonna say h2. Just say h2, right? We're gonna say inventory items, inventory items. Oh, why inventory? Why inventory? Why am I pressing M? Inventory items. Okay, don't know why what's happening. My keyboard is a bit small. Okay. So under this, we need an unordered list. Okay, so this unordered list will have an ID of items list. Okay, so we don't put anything here because we're gonna add these dynamically, right? We're gonna fetch these from the database and display them. So it's gonna be added dynamically, right? via GS code. Okay, so the last thing we want is to include our script here. Okay, we need to include our script, reference our JS script. So we're going to say source index.js, right? So the script that we created here. Okay, and then we close that. Okay, so this is our HTML for our front end app. Okay, it's simple, it's easy, there is no complications here. Okay, but you can mess around with it however you want. But for now, we need to focus on the index.js. What I like to say is functionality first before the nice to have features, right? So you'd want to have a functioning app before you can add some style, some, you know, to make it really look nice. Okay, but first you must have to make it look functional. Alright, so now that we have created our HTML, it is time to do the fun part, which is create our index.js code so that we can connect to our database, okay, to our backend code. So the first thing we need is a URL. So we're gonna say const, we're gonna say const app URL, right? API URL, and then we need to fetch our URL. So this is in our backend. So let's go back to our backend and see where the pod is. So I'm just gonna go here. Remember that I said leave the backend running, right? So you wanna copy this. Let me just close this. So you wanna copy this. Okay, so copy this localhost 5292 and then go to your front end and paste this and just say app IP and then say items. Alright, so remember that this pod right here is going to be different for you. So that's why I'm saying that when you leave your backend running, you should copy this because this number is going to be different for you. Okay, so let's go back to the front end again. Alright, so now let's write code to fetch all items. So we're going to say async function fetch items. Alright. Okay, so firstly we're gonna get the response from our server. Const response await fetch, right? And then we pass in our app URL, this one above, right? So when we get the response from the server, we wanna get items in a JSON list. So we're gonna say items await response dot.json. Okay, and then we wanna have the constant list item reference, right? So you're gonna have items list, so document dot get element by ID. All right, so remember when we created the HTML, right, we created this unordered list right here. This is where we will display all the items that we get from the server, right? So we need this list ID. So to prevent any mistakes, just copy this ID right here, right? Copy it and then go paste it here when you're getting your element by ID. All right, now we need to set this items list to null at first because we want to keep updating this list. So we're going to say inner HTML is going to be set to null. All right, then we want to get this items right here and iterate over it. Items dot for each item we want to do something. We want to create a list element. So document dot create element. We want to create the list element, right? And we want to store this content. We want to store this content in this list element. So careful now. I'm gonna use these type of quotations. I don't know what they're called, but you'll find them at the corner end of your keyboard. All right, and then you wanna have your $sign and then you want to include item.id, okay, and then dash quantity, and in the quantity you'll have, sorry, $, you'll have your item dot quantity. All right, and then as you guessed it, you'll then have price, right? Your item price, $, and we need another dollar for the currency, right? $. Let me just compress this a bit so we can see. All right, and then when I say item dot price, right? Item dot price, and we might as well just fix this to two decimal places. All right, okay, and then we wanna say items list, right? Items list dot append this child, this list element child. Okay, nice. Okay, so what we want to do now is create another element to delete our item, right? So delete, we're going to create delete button. Use document dot create element button. Okay, and then delete button dot text content, we want to set this to delete. All right, and then we want to say delete button dot on click on click method is dot, let's say delete button dot on click. Okay, that's an anonymous function right here, and we want to create a function, so we're going to say delete item and then pass in the item ID here. Okay, item.id. Okay, so yeah, then we want to create this function just right away so that we don't forget it. I'm going to say async again function, right? And we're going to say delete item, sorry, we're going to say ID because we have already passed in the item.id here for the reference item. Okay, for the reference item. Okay, so here we can just say ID, and then this is where we must implement the delete functionality. Okay, so for now we'll just leave it like that. So we'll come back here later. Right now we need to append this delete button to the child that we created, to the list element that we created here. So we're going to say append the delete button. All right, so what we want to do now is make sure that everything is running okay, right? Check some errors. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say here, right here at the bottom, we're going to say window dot onload, right? We want to fetch items from the database. Okay, so right now we don't have any items in the database, but we just want to make sure that everything runs smoothly. So we're going to say here, see right here below this items, right? What you want to do is say console.log, right? So make sure that we are getting an array, maybe an empty array, but at least we're getting something from the database. Okay, so let's just go live right now. Okay, so we are live. This is our UI. So okay, what we're going to do now is inspect and go to console. Okay, so we are getting an empty array. This is good. No errors whatsoever, so this is good. So it means that we can actually continue. So I'm just going to close it for now, dispose of this part right here. So I'm just going to close this. All right, so now let's continue. What we want to do now is add new items. Okay, so we want to add an item. So what we're going to do is say async function, right? So we have to be careful here. Remember that in the index.html we said that we're going to call this function whenever we want to add a new item. So just copy the name of this function as it appears here in the HTML to prevent any errors. So I've just copied it 1,000 times and I've pasted it here, and now I can continue with my code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const name is, I'm going to say document dot get element by ID. Again, I'm going to go back to my HTML index and I'm going to get this item element, right? So remember, this is a form, right? And in this form, this is where we actually enter our item. So we enter the item name, the item quantity, and the item price. So that's why I have to copy this ID so that I can get the value from this form right here. Okay, so I'm gonna come here and say this, and then so I say dot value. Okay, and then just do the same thing, right? So, oh wait, what is this? Area value max? No. This is supposed to be value. Okay, why is it auto completing? Okay, so now you're gonna say const quantity document, right, dot get element by ID, right, and then we're going to go back to the HTML and say item quantity, copy this item quantity right here, paste it here, and then say dot value. All right, and then we're going to say const price, right, is document dot get element by ID, right, come back to the index.html, copy this from the form, the item dot price ID, and paste it here. All right, and then say dot value. Nice. Okay, so now you're just getting the information here that is entered by the user, and you want to create an item object. Okay, so you're gonna say item is equals to name, right, and then you're gonna say quantity, but remember, quantity you might receive in the form of a string, so we have to parse it as an integer, and then we're gonna say quantity. All right, and then price, same thing as well. Since you expecting to get a float, you want to convert this to a float, and then you say your price. Okay, let me just separate this. Okay, so just ensure that this is all correct. Okay, ensure that this is all correct, and then now we have to update our database. So we're going to say await fetch, right? Remember, we have our own URL, but we're going to say API URL, comma, right? And then we're going to include curly braces, and we're going to say method type is post. Okay, method type is post, capital letter post. Okay, and then we have our headers, right? In our headers, we're going to say content type is application /JSON. Okay, and then lastly we need to say the body is our item that we're just trying to pass, right? We're gonna say body, right, and we're gonna say JSON, right, dot stringify, so we're converting it back to JSON, and then we say item, right, the item object that we created right here. All right, so let me just remove that. You don't need that here, and then we do need this. Yeah, okay, so this is our add item button, right? We are done with implementing the adding an item functionality. Now we need to make sure that whenever we just added a new item, we need to make sure that we fetch this new item, right? We need to make sure that we call fetch items because we need an updated list of items from our backend. Otherwise, if you don't add this here, the new item that you just added, you won't be able to see on your front end. All right. With this, we can now actually test this out. Let us go live again. All right, so now let's try adding an item. So we're gonna say banana, quantity is 20, and maybe let's say it's $50. Okay, we add this, and you can see we get it, right? It's ID here, which is 5, Wait, ID is 5. No, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is supposed to be the name of the item right here, right? So either way though, we are able to get information from the database, okay? Okay, but first let's fix this. Let's fix this first, okay? Let's come back here in our front end code, right? So let's see why we're getting 5 there. You see, this is the problem right here. We said item.id. We're supposed to say item.name. All right, we just say item.name. Now, if you go back to your code and let's just dispose of the pod and go live again. Okay, so you can see now it updated to banana, quantity 20 and price $50, and you get this delete functionality right here, but it doesn't work for now because we haven't implemented this. Right, let's add another item, for example, fruits, right? No, not fruits. Let's say apple. Let's say we want daddy, or maybe, yeah, daddy, and then let's say maybe it's $100, and then we add this. As you can see, this new item is added to the inventory, right? And this is actually persistent, right? It persists even if you close this application right here, right? Even if you close it and close the pod right here, and then open it again, right? If we go live again and open it again, you'll see that the items that we added are still there, right? They are still here because this is saved in the backend, in the database, right? Which is nice. So now let's find a way to actually implement this delete button right here, okay? So we're gonna have to know how to delete this item right here, right? So let's do that, right? Let's implement the delete functionality. So remember that we created this ID right here, right? I mean this method right here. So what we need to do is make sure that we are getting this ID first, right? That's the first part. Just make sure that you're getting the correct ID. So I'm gonna say console.log ID before going any further so that I don't waste time. Okay, so I'm gonna do is rerun the app again and click this and then come back to inspect and console. So you see I'm getting 5, right? I'm getting 5 right here as my ID. So which means I am getting an ID. Okay, so I'm just gonna close this and I'm gonna come back to my code, my front end code, remember. So what I'm gonna do now is implement my delete button. So what I'm gonna do is say await fetch, no, this fetch, not the fetch items, this fetch, and I'm gonna say these quotations and then $, and I'm gonna say API URL, this URL, okay, and then I'm gonna say /, right, and then I'm gonna pass in the ID as well, the ID, this ID here, okay, and then I'm gonna say comma, and what I want to do is say method. This time the method is delete. Make sure you get this right. Delete. All right. So then after doing this, I'm done with my delete functionality. It's really concise, right? What I have to do now is make sure to update the database. I'm going to send it fetch items, right? And let's see if this works. So if I now go back here and press delete, oh, it doesn't work. Delete. Okay, let's see if I did something wrong here. So everything is in order. Let me see the ID I did get. Okay, so I think this might be something to do with my backend, right? So it might be my backend code. So let's just go back to the backend quickly. So it's already running right here and we are receiving everything. So it has to do with controllers for sure. Okay, then if I go here, where is my delete? Oh, yeah. So as you can see here, my annotations are wrong. So that's why I said annotations are important, right? So if you can see here, all my put has these curly braces right here, right? Even this one, the get item, has curly braces right here, right? But with my delete functionality, I missed these curly braces, so I need to put them here. Right. So obviously now I need to restart the server because I have made some changes, right? So I'm just going to shut it down and say .NET run. So I'm just going to leave it like this because it's going to be running anyways. I'm going to go back to my front-end code. Let me see if the server is running again. Okay, so the server is running. So I'm just going to go back to my front-end code and try to delete again. Alright, you saw that the item got deleted, right? So let's delete this one again. Alright, so if we actually close this and dispose of our pod and just restart it again, you'll see that you won't see any items anymore, right? Because all the items have been deleted. So now we can add an item, say maybe books, right? Maybe there are 10 books, maybe they're worth $150, right? And add, we get the books item, we get the quantity of the books, which is 10, we get the price, which is $150, right? We can add as many items as we like, right? We can delete them as well. Okay, so we are officially done with our inventory management system. Okay, so what I will challenge you to do right now is to add more functionality to this, right? So we are able to now add an item, we're able to delete an item, right? But what I want you to do now is try to implement a functionality that updates a single item, right? So improve the UI, make a functionality that updates a single item, right? Make a functionality that deletes all items at once, right? Maybe you have a delete all buttons here, right? And then you just click this button and everything goes, right? So try doing that. But essentially, this is how you would develop a full stack application in C#. Obviously, we haven't done a bunch of features like authentication, right? How to handle authentication, right? And maybe how to handle when you're deploying the application. What do you need to change? How do you deploy a full stack application that is written in C#, right? Obviously, the front end side is easy because we were using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So that is easy enough. We can just deploy it in Netlify, right? Or something like that. But with our backend, how do we host our backend, right? Those are all the things that you need to consider when building something like this, right? So I hope that this video was really helpful for you. If you find it really helpful, please consider liking and subscribing, and let me know in the comments what you think. All right, I will see you.